We know that math is not money and money is not math, and they don't do the same things. You can't put numbers on a piece of paper and just say, this is money.
We also have this Ponzi scheme called Social Security that also compels you to get into this idea of just checking out, putting your feet up and being done at 65.
COVID, as we talk about all the time, has been like a smack in the face of like, so what else from this 20th century construct is just absolutely built on a foundation of lies? We're planning on building this wealth. And so maybe we don't have to work for money and, 40 hours a week as a slave to a job in our 60s or even in our 50s.
The parents bought it in the 60s for $50,000, and now it's a $7 million quarter acre lot. That is not value creation. That is just asset price inflation. We never talk about retirement planning because I think that's a ridiculous thing that needs to go away. To change the tax law is a pretty burdensome, long overhaul process. So it's not like this is the kind of thing that just changes every year. Let's just say it doubles. In 20 years, you are now paying double the taxes that you planned on. Whatever you plan on right now, will you survive that? Absolutely not.
Hey, good morning from your time. It's a little after noon here. Rocking and rolling, starting on a new week for me. It feels like I'm all mismanaged right now because I've been on the road for 5 days and I can't even figure out what day it is.
When you're flying early bags, late bags, when your schedule's all over the place, you're just talking about the airline schedulers don't really appreciate the fact, the adjustment required to correct your circadian rhythm. So you can't just go from a night flight and then a morning flight, 36 hours later without some negative repercussions there. And probably feeling that right now.
Yeah, but fortunately, as far as this airline gig, and I think we talked about it a little bit here on the podcast, but I was hired, before we got together as Remnant Finance, took a long leave from it for military, and now I'm kind of back with American short term, hopefully. And I had to get some requirements done post training. You have to fly so many hours right after you get training. I just finished that block of training, so I'll hopefully not have to do as many of these crazy schedules and have a little bit better picking things and working at the airline a lot less and working with Remnant Finance a lot more from today going forward.
Yeah, well, we're going to make that happen in 2025 where you have the option to quit that if you want to, but that is a great thing to have in your back pocket, have that little safety foundation there. So, and it's pretty fun. I mean, it's not the same as military flying as far as exciting, but not a bad way to make money.
No, it's a great way to make money, and it's cool. I mean, you're around exclusively whoever you're sharing the flight deck, as we call it now. I still call it a cockpit, but whoever you're sharing that cockpit with is typically a pretty intelligent person. The bad thing is you never develop any kind of real long-term relationship because you spend 3 days with somebody and you might not see them again or fly with them again for years. But you're always spending time with somebody that you can have a pretty high level conversation with, and they pay you extremely well to manage systems. So it's a great gig, but this is way better because this job that we have here with Remnant Finance impacts people's lives. And man, that's way more fulfilling than getting somebody in a tube from one place to another while they sit at a chair at 36,000 feet.
Ties in pretty nicely with our slogan at Remnant Finance, which is stop being a passenger. We often say stop being a passenger in your family's financial economy or financial journey. And so we're trying to train people to take controls themselves. And so that fits. But I got to ask, you said flight deck. Is that like a new PC change, or is that just what the airlines have always called it?
No, I think it's become a new PC change. So like if you even listen on it is so hard to say because I'm just so used to a whole career in the military calling it a cockpit. When the captain or first officer makes an announcement over the PA, they're supposed to say whoever they are or from the flight deck or something like that. But we're supposed to exclusively call it a flight deck. And it's just stupid language. It's a cockpit. It's been a cockpit since the 19 teens. I don't know how long it goes back. Over 100 years we've called it a cockpit, but now all of a sudden that's
preposterous.
Yeah, like South Carolina is going to pretty soon have to change their, they're not going to be able to be the Gamecocks soon. They're going to have to be the Game Chickens or something. It's ridiculous.
Being offended is a problem on the person taking offense. Like you can only take offense. It can't be given. It's a choice. It's preposterous that we cater to this. And if you're still kind of on like, well, I don't say these words because, it could be offensive. I mean, this example of the cockpit, I did not know that was a thing. You can't get any more stupid than that. I mean, that is gay and retarded. We need to stop this. That's super, super gay and incredibly frustrating. Just threw me off because that's the dumbest thing I've heard in a long time. Let's talk about money. Okay. So 2 episodes ago, we talked about saving versus investing versus speculation. We are going to continue that theme today. What we presented on, I'll say episode 24 I believe, was what does the players on the other side of the table from you, financial industry, the financial institutions, banking, the government, the IRS, et cetera. What do they're on the other side of the table from you? What do they want? Big picture, we said they want four things. They want our money. They want it on a regular and ongoing basis. They want to keep it as long as possible, and they want to give back as little as possible. Okay, that's like the overall, you know, everything they're doing falls within those four things. We also talked about the accumulation theory versus the velocity of money theory, as you might call it, where we are taught to do what they do not do. They've cash flow money. They think about the velocity of money. They don't focus on net worth. We do the opposite. We made an analogy to like our financial economy we're told that what we might call pond money. It's just sitting there stagnant. It's not flowing. It might be growing, but it's providing no cash flow. There's no thoughts of like putting energy into this. It's just stored up and build a nest egg. Versus the velocity of money, where you have a river that's actually providing energy. So that's sort of the big picture here. What we want to do get more in the weeds now is, okay, if you understand and buy off on those ideas conceptually, what is the actual conversation you're going to have with your CFP, and why do we all have the same playbook? If we all have the same advice and none of us are, quote, financial experts or anything, but we all can say the same things, where did that come from? On our weekly episode review email, I told a story that I've heard a few different times, most recently from Trent Fordner, our mentor, who the idea is like, if you go to a blackjack table in a casino and you might see players looking down at a card, and that card, if you ask them, is the cheat sheet, basically, like how to win at blackjack, the best thing to do in every single possible set of hands that you could have. And so you might ask, is that cheating? Why would they allow that? But in reality, the dealer gives you the card if you ask for it. So if we're all given the same financial cheat sheet card here, we all know the same things: compound interest, reinvest your dividends, buy and hold, in it for the long haul, high risk, high rewards, only paper losses, dollar cost average, all of these, we all have the same playbook, but we all have very drastically different situations. And that's because when we go to the financial planning conversation, it's like all of these input factors that determine who you are in your family situation get distilled and filtered through this model. And we want to talk about the model today. I'm going to start with one quote here that is the summary. This is from a book called Principles-Based Planning by Kyle Christensen. I'm going to read this quote, and then as we listen through, we talk about the three things that we would recall this model, the CFP model, financial planning industry model. Think about the four things we talk about that institutions want and how they fit in as we go through this model. So here's the quote. The overall theory is this: you work and earn, then automatically and systematically, quote, save some of what you earn, contributing to a diversified portfolio of investments, typically through mutual funds and all their varieties, and retirement plans, ETF, SPDRs, index funds, actively managed funds, REITs, hedge funds, etc. And then compound your interest until you built a sufficient nest egg to retire on. Once you retire, you are supposed to self-insure, i.e. cancel your life insurance, and live on the interest only from your assets for the rest of your life. There's a lot of buzzwords in there, but basically that sounds like you build up this pond, and then at a certain point, you're supposed to flip a switch and now live off of the interest. And that, now you have to start thinking about cash flow, and that just doesn't work like that. And so let's start with the model. If we're going to break it into three things, what does this model consist of? What is everyone who goes to the CFP filtered through, and how do we progress through this?
There are a couple things in this model that aren't bad before we start breaking it down, I'd say. And, so that quote, the overall theory is this: you work and earn. Maybe you get your money to work for you, but in some way you earn. And you automatically and systematically save some of what you earn. You should. I'm with that. So it's like, these are good things. And then it starts to break down because it starts to tell you exactly how to do it. And I do believe that everybody needs to have a strong foundation of savings. First, it's what we're missing in America, and it's what we believe we do via the vehicle that we always talk about, whole life insurance, and then practice the infinite banking with those savings. But all right, so in the model, the first thing that it talks about is that we can't do, where it starts to fall apart, is predict the future, because it's almost like they know what all of these things are going to do, this diversified portfolio is going to do. And then they know that you're going to be able to live off the interest, and they know that you're going to be able to self-insure. So, but there's all kinds of questions about that are unpredictable. So when are you going to retire, I think, is the first one. They just draw assumptions on that. The first part is that, like, my first breakdown of that I have a problem with the conventional model is more of a philosophical problem than it is a numeric. We know that math is not money and money is not math, and they don't do the same things. So you can't put numbers on a piece of paper and just say, like, this is money, this is how this is going to work. It just it never actually happens that way. I mean, sure, the calculations for guaranteed interest could work, but nothing maths that way, right, when it comes to our money. So the first thing that philosophically is just like, why do we in America believe this 20th century construct that everybody should just retire, and here's the age you should do it, and then we build an entire structure around that. I'm not even talking about the money yet, but we like the CFPs build this entire structure around an assumption that everybody has like a right to stop working at an exact age. And it's always that everybody gives you the exact same age. And they say, but if it does better, you can do earlier. Here's the goal. Why is that a goal? It's 65. That's always the number, right?
Yeah, and they ingrain that behavior. Not only is it beaten into our heads over and over, like everyone, probably 10-year-old could tell you what the retirement age is, even though that's not a real thing. Like that's not a real thing. That is just marketing. But we also have this Ponzi scheme called Social Security that also compels you to get into this idea of just being, checking out, putting your feet up and being done at 65, because there's that range of when your Social Security kicks in. So we're all being stolen from for decades and decades and decades. And that sets up an incentive structure where, hey, Social Security is going to go bankrupt. It's not going to be there for future generations. It's a Ponzi scheme and a crime. However, you've put 40 years of money into this. You haven't put it in. They've stolen it from you and put it in here. So damn it, I'm going to get mine, and one generation is going to have to be the generation that takes the hit on, hey, yeah, they stole from me for 4 decades. It sucks.
I'm in like the last year. Well, it's varied because they've changed the goalpost of like how they define generations. So I was part of Gen X, and then I was called a Zennial for a little bit, and now like I think they've solidified it and said like 1981, the year I was born, is the start of millennials. So cool, but like I probably identify more with the Gen X culture than I do what people think of as the millennial culture. But like, so the Gen X, like, we just bought this like boomer idea that like this is just how it is because somebody said so. I just had a conversation the other day on the phone with somebody, and it was like that generation just absolutely struck gold on the timeline of history, where we hit the biggest boom, not just them being called boomers, but even economic boom in like the history of mankind, or at least modern history. And they were able to do things like, there was what, like 30 something workers or people contributing to Social Security for everybody drawing one. So the numbers seemed like they were going to work. That socialist experiment, which is always going to be a failure, but it looked good in the beginning, right? And then they had this economic boom where they could actually save, and the stock market was roaring, and things just looked great, and manufacturing jobs were strong. The Gen X just kind of bought into it because it just, made sense. And we were at home as latchkey kids. And now I think the millennial generation, but we're all waking up. We're all looking at this. Like, I think through COVID, as we talk about all the time, has been like a smack in the face of like, so what else from this 20th century construct is just absolutely built on a house or a card, a foundation of lies. And now the millennial generation is really starting to recognize that everything, because they're the ones who've really been attacking the generation that created all this. And it's my hope that the next generation is the ones that turn it around. But so this idea of retirement, even though I'm on a huge long tangent and probably talking in circles at this point, it's just a fabrication. Like, I believe that we are put on this planet and we have a purpose. And our purpose isn't to like sit and watch TV and then go out and golf and meet other old men for coffee once a week. Like, we should be serving in some way. So maybe that looks different because we're planning on building this wealth. And so maybe we don't have to work for money and, 40 hours a week as a slave to a job in our 60s or even in our 50s. But what's this idea that we should just stop and live on interest and like live a lesser life on interest is what that really means, because it's probably not going to work. I don't know. It's just, retirement drives me nuts that there's this like this right we have as Americans to not work anymore once we hit a certain age.
Man, there's so much on that. And honestly, I think this will be 2 episodes. I think we're probably just going to be going for 2 hours here, and we'll make this 2 episodes because there's just so much here. I agree. The conditions were prime to have this roaring economy and the continuous creation of money, not to the degree we've seen in the last couple of years where it skyrockets and actually puts this whole thing on like kind of a dangerous precipice. But for decades of just continuous growth, I mean, you didn't have to make any decisions. Like you just had to buy a property over the course of the last 50 years. You just had to purchase a property. And so, I mean, where I live on Coronado here, $1 million would get you a studio apartment built in the 70s. It's insanely expensive, but you have these homes here where the parents bought it in the 60s for $50,000 and now it's a $7 million like quarter acre lot. That is not value creation. That is just asset price inflation. And so the creation of wealth over that time period is prolific. And unfortunately, there has not been subsequent wage increase to match this asset price inflation, which is why you always hear like, oh, millennials are always complaining. The cost of living right now is vastly outshot. And so like the cool thing we can do and how we can break this cycle. I'm not at retirement age. I'm nowhere near there. I'm 36 now. So I've been working for 15-ish years as an adult. And so I've contributed 15 years into the scam, the crime of the grift of Social Security. But all right, let's take our generation and let's just break the cycle. Let's stop the retirement thing. Let's just get that out of the lexicon. Let's break the evil cycle of Social Security. And okay, you've paid into it for 40 years. You know it's bullshit, and you know that it should go away today. However, I get it. You paid for 40 years. You planned on it. It's been part of this financial strategy. So I get it. That's not going to happen. AARP is the strongest lobbying group in the country, maybe after Raytheon and Lockheed. So that's not going to happen. But how about our generation? How about we take it and just take the hit? And because the whole thing is you should leave it better for your children. This is the first generation. I think millennials on paper are the first generation that are not going to be left better off than their parents as a whole. I think that there's value in what happened with COVID and everyone waking up and seeing through the mirage of so many things. It's like going from this idea of the military pension and I'm just going to retire and maybe I'll pick up a second job and I'll have 100% disability. Like this kind of pathetic way of and the last phase of your life where you're just kind of a leech. You're just sort of like sucking off of the teat, providing no more value. It's just this idea of, we all kind of know that you go nuts after a week on the beach. Like you want to go be productive. And so this idea that you're just going to take a couple decades, maybe 2, maybe 4 decades and just check out and provide no value. I mean, it's ridiculous. My dad's retired now. He did, 30 plus years with also the State Department, with government and such. So he's retired now, but he is taken up translating Russian books from a pastor in Russia that he knows. He's a linguist and speaks a bunch of languages, and he is taking this pastor's work in Russian and working with him to translate it to English for publication here. And that's like a very time-consuming product, but it's providing value, and it's taking that energy of just what could just be idle time of sitting and golfing, reading, whatever.
He has a purpose. Like he wakes up and he has something he needs to accomplish.
A lot of things have to change as far as like the structure of this, because by default, the guardrails on this bowling lane are just going to get you to this system if you don't do something to jump the track. And so a lot of things would have to change, but we personally can change to where we can just remove retirement from our planning concept. But when we talk through with clients, we rarely mention retirement. I mean, they might mention it and they might have some goals of when they want to stop their current job and start thinking about passive income. But, we never talk about retirement planning, because I think that's a ridiculous thing that needs to go away. We don't want to be taken out of service. We don't want to just stop creating value. And so why don't we, our generation, I'm like smack in the middle of the millennial generation, why don't we just take the hit, end Social Security? Up to this year, people will get paid. So like the entire boomer generation, people that have actually contributed to it, even on by theft for decades and decades and decades, will get their due return, a fraction of what it should be had they had control of that money themselves, but whatever. But at a certain point, let's just say this year it's going to stop paying out, and just nobody contributes to dime to it. We let it collapse. It's preposterous.
I'd be happy even if we did something like, instead of sending billions of dollars to Ukraine and wherever, in Israel and every other stupid place we send it to, what if we just like said, hey, everybody under the age of 45, which would include me, so I'm going to pick that number, we're going to pay you back your principal that you've put in over the next 5 years, and then just call it done. I would take that over like still being in this scam system for the rest of my life. Anyway, there's got to be a way. But and you mentioned something that hits home for me is, what are the millennials you said are the first generation that looks like they're going to be worse off than their parents?
Yeah, I mean, Again, asset price inflation is going to make those numbers.
But there was also this like faulty idea, and it's not obviously I'm speaking in generalities here, but there was this idea because I've heard it over and over and over, and I've typically heard it from people that are older, that I'm going to spend everything and I'm not worried about leaving money behind or leaving my children better because they can build their own. I had to build my own, et cetera, et cetera, and I'm going to spend it. And it's just like that's crazy to me. And most of our audience is men, and I say this that to the men out there who have children, it should be your an absolute priority of yours to make sure that your children and your grandchildren who you can impact on this earth blow past you in every positive way of life you can think of. They should have stronger faith than you do because you've planted those seeds younger and in a more systematic way. They should be stronger and faster than you were physically and more healthy than you. They should have more money than you ever had. They should have a better community than you ever had because you should help them build it from a young age in ways that we weren't handed. Like that should be our goal, not to like, oh heck with it, they can do it on their own because that's what I did, and I want to waste all my money I made and leave nothing for my children. Like that is such a bizarre idea, and it's not that rare is what's sad. I wish it was rare. I wish that when I heard that I was surprised, but I'm not. Every time I hear it I'm just like disappointed again. I'm not even surprised.
And we've got I would say the cream of the crop is like our client base for the most part are guys that were in the mandate fight with us, guys that resonate with what we're talking about. We've got, I'd say, some of the top tier selection of critical thinkers that come work with us due to how we present our content, how we talk through these ideas. We've got some really, really solid folks, and we've heard this idea, and it's kind of weird how you could get to that point because, you ask me now, you ask any young father, would you lay down your life for your children? Without hesitation. Of course we would. Would you go take a job? I go down with the Mexicans at Home Depot and be looking for day work before, giving up my children. Right. So like we would do anything for our children now. And then this idea that all of a sudden they become adults and now we're just going to just blow their inheritance. We're going to disregard Proverbs that says we're going to leave an inheritance to our children's children. It's like this idea that we are just, it's a luxury born of total indulgence, that we're just these dandies that are just going to indulge in every excess that we want. I want to do more cruises. I just want like this idea we're just going to spend on ourselves. Like we're these just bloated royalties when all we did was just buy a house in the 1970s and then sold it instead of giving it to our children, we sold it to BlackRock for 50x what we paid for it. And now we're just going to blow through this money. And it's just this, gluttony and excess of luxury, and not in this, I don't know. It's a disgusting mindset overall that is so pervasive. We're on the first bullet point of the first thing of predict the future, because we got to predict the future as the first step. That presumes that we can predict the future. And the first thing that is on there is when will we retire? That might be as far as we get today, but this just needs to be hammered home how unappreciative that is of like the future generations. And I'm writing a paper right now or an article called The Waiting List about fatherhood. And it's because this has nothing to do with finance, but it's because I've got 4 or 5 friends, relatives who like, I know the wife, I know them both. I know the wife who really want kids and the husbands are on the fence or they're not ready. And like, it's an urge to men to have kids now. And this list of items, why you wait, et cetera. So it's really made me think through like, what would I actually trade for my daughters? And the answer is nothing. Right. And so this idea that like, there's nothing more precious in the world to me than my 2 daughters. And then I don't understand how I could anywhere bridge the gap to think like, okay, well, you guys are 30 now, you have your own, your own thing going on. I pulled myself up by the bootstraps and so you have to do the same. And I'm just going to blow your inheritance on, cruises and wine. Like I'm very blessed because that's not my parents at all. And I didn't have to pull myself up by the bootstraps. Like I had a great home. I had very diligent savers as parents. We didn't want for anything, but I still had to learn to work hard. Like my path was easy to get to a good paying job. How dare I like not provide that for my daughters when I was given that? And this idea that you're going to just cut the legs out from them because you had to work hard to get it, even if you didn't have that, even if you came from nothing and had to work, hustle and grind. Like it's just, how dare you, that idea, that ideology that's so awful. Anyways, maybe we can get back to money here. Things that we don't know, things we can't predict, but I don't know if we need to, because I think this is something that we as a generation need to grapple with and pause and do a reverse course, because we cannot continue what's happening right now with the retirement, the what's being left behind. We are the lowest savings. We have the worst retirement system of the modern world by any study that's been done. Like, this whole thing, it needs to stop.
It's, I mean, from my perspective too, it's even a biblical command. I mean, that of what we're intended to do here. Like, it's basically the first command given by God in Genesis chapter 1 is dominion. And so I just wanted to, I was thinking about it while you were talking there. I wanted to bring it up. Genesis 1, chapter 1, verse 28, it starts, and God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. I've given you, and he says he's given us everything on the face of the earth, and where we're supposed to go forth and do things with that and create and build, because that's God's first thing that it discusses, is he created the heavens and the earth, and then he created man in his own image. So if we're in God's image, what are we to do with that? We're to create. We're to create, we're to subdue, we're to have dominion, and we're to be fruitful and multiply. And somewhere along the way, there was this idea that it's like a selfish idea, actually, in that I need to have more for me so I can live a better life. And that's the problem with the people who are the 30 somethings who just want to keep having a bigger career and want to keep being able to do more things. And I want to be able to travel. The root of that is selfishness. Like, I want to do this for me. But the bad thing about it, the upside down idea around that selfishness, is that it is the most selfish thing you can do, is spend all your time and your money on yourself and not have children, because the children are like a biological imperative of what you give this world and the way this world grows and the way your bloodline continues. We had an awesome conversation last week about, like, it's like nation building with your bloodline. You as the father, be the one who builds a greater nation that is like, the Tui nation, the Moody nation, if you think of it that way. Like, build that bloodline out. So not doing that so you can do other things, that's the selfishness, is that you're taking that away from the earth. You're taking that away from the world. You're taking away the possibility of what your kids can create and the things they can have dominion over, especially when you create the proper guardrails to teach them how to do that in the formative years when they need those guardrails. Like, it's crazy. But we want to retire. So that's the goal. For me, I want to do it for me.
Yeah, exactly. I think that you should end each day exhausted and, creating value, whether that's just cleaning your house, taking something off your wife's plate as far as taking care of your kids, or because you worked all day, but decide just being an indulgent dandy traipsing around, stuffing your face with experience and food and whatever. It's kind of a gross image to me that I think we should break. But anyways, if we can get back onto the model here, we'll try. Even though this is way more enjoyable.
We're at 30 minutes, so let's knock out. We'll talk about predicting the future. So all the way back to when you asked me the question, like, what are those things? I'm gonna tell you what the 4 are. We're not even gonna talk about them in this episode, and we'll talk about the first one, or at least a couple of them. They're predicting the future. The stock market is the foundation of what you're gonna do when in the standard financial planning model, and building a retirement nest egg. Let's just try to finish up, even if it's somewhat briefly, because we're 31 minutes in, and I think that was a probably better discussion. But predict the future. So when are we going to retire? I think we beat that to death. We don't think we should, but this model tries to predict when we're going to do it. And they say between 62 and 65 is the normal little age range. And everybody's shooting for that exact thing, regardless of how old you are, regardless of where you are whenever you started. So if you made mistakes in your past and you did things poorly financially, and now you're at the look back period like me, and we get that, like, I'm 43, I'll be 44 next year. It's like, I'm halfway between this model's retirement age and when I finished my bachelor's degree. So I'm at that point, like, I look back and I go, hey, that's all the time I have to the supposed retirement age. Like, how do I get there? And they still say, well, you need to get there. That's still the goal. Even if I screwed up those first 22, it's crazy. So the next thing, in which I'll let you talk about, what are the taxes going to be when we get there?
Yeah, that's an assumption that's always made, that the taxes will stay the same. You're going to be listening to this at the very tail end of 2025, late December probably. And that means that we're 1 year away from Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the TCJA, sunsetting at the end of 2025. Now, that is very likely going to get extended or made permanent, which is a good thing. But the expectation was that had Kamala Harris won the election, she would have let those sunset. Congress would have let those sunset. There would be no push to get them renewed, and we'd be enjoying much higher corporate and personal taxes, both of which would be negative impacts on our personal economies. And so the tax plan is going to change at the end of 2025. So is it going to change by the time you retire? You got 20 more years till you get there. Yeah, it's going to change again. Now, the process of changing it, there's a lot of talk. You'll hear tax policy thrown around in, on the news, and all it takes is a candidate saying something that they want to change. But actually, to change the tax law is a pretty burdensome, long overhaul process. So it's not like this is the kind of thing that just changes every year. We know for sure that it will change by the time we retire. What are they doing right now? They're creating an endless amount of money that's driving everything up. Would they be incentivized to raise or lower taxes? If we know they're going to change, they're not going to stay static. We know that. So would they be incentivized to raise or lower them? I would argue raise, but when you when you plan through this, you look at the current tax brackets and you assume they will be the same when you retire. I'm gonna roll another assumption in here that they make, because it's a part of it is that you'll be in a lower cost of living. So you'll be making less income and you'll be in a lower tax bracket. So they say, here's the 2025, 2024 tax brackets. Here's the one you're in right now. When you retire, you'll be living on less and earning less. Why is that the goal?
Todd Langford always says, and I love this, he goes, so especially in those early years, like you're telling me that I'm going to spend less when every day is Saturday. Even right there, if you think about like, what are you going to do if you don't have you will spend more if you're not spending your time doing something productive, because you're healthy. You're going to go out and do stuff. You're going to get lunch more. Just on that basis, like I'm gonna go out into town and grab lunch and pick something up at Walmart, and whatever you do, that's asinine to begin with. That you're gonna all of a sudden like need less money.
That's a great little like rhetorical. When every day is a Saturday, why do you think you'd be spending less? That's great. But that is that idea, and that is what they plan for. And they always say 70% of your current spending, you're gonna be lower income because we're gonna be relying on interest from our nest egg and Social Security. Again, by default, you will be herded into this if you don't do something yourself to put some guardrails up against it, or to get off this track. You're just going to be in this situation where you're counting on Social Security as a component of your retirement income, contributing to your tax bracket, and all of these assumptions. We don't know what taxes will be. Literally, what if the tax rate were doubled? You make these assumptions. Here's the plan. We use the 4% rule. We're going to draw down. Don't know how long I'm going to live, but I'm going to draw down and have enough income. And most of the time, the market's going to provide enough for the market will provide, and I will not outlive my money and spend it down to zero. Well, let's just say the taxes double. Is that possible? Yeah. Has it been in the history of America double what it is now? More than that, 1.5x. Yes, it has. Let's just say it doubles. In 20 years, you are now paying double the taxes that you planned on. Whatever you plan on right now, will you survive that? Absolutely not.
And whenever I do like a live presentation or a webinar type presentation, I got these slides that it's just to get people thinking about this, and it shows. I say, hey, I met with a family last week, and they're making, I don't know the exact numbers right now, they're making 40 something $1,000 a year. They're spending just about $70,000 a year, and they have $360,000 in debt. What are some recommendations you would have for this family? I asked some questions, and without fail, the first recommendation is, well, they need to get out of debt. And it was just like, well, that's not as easy with right where they are right now, because nobody can just like cut enough spending to recover this. So what else they have to do? And everybody says, oh, they need to find a way to earn more money. Would you lend money to these people, or would you take financial advice from these people? And the answers are no and no and no. And then the next slide, it multiplies by all the zeros required to turn that into trillions. And I say, this is actually the budget, the current budget. Like I just chunked those numbers down from that 40-some thousand. That's the revenue in $4 trillion that the government's getting. They're spending close to 7 trillion, and it was 36 trillion in debt, or whatever those numbers happen to be. I always look it up at, right before the day before I do that, update that slide. And it's the same question. So the only answer when we look at it as a family is they have to make more money. So the government then has to make more money to solve, and I'm putting that in air quotes if you're listening. They're not going to solve it, but to rectify this problem is to make more money. The government can only make, again in quotes, money one way, and that's to print it, or to go through the Federal Reserve and have it printed, and all that stuff that I don't want to dive into, or to tax it. So the next question is, do you think your taxes, when we look at how much debt there is, are going up or down in the future? And I've never had somebody say down. And then I've even asked, do you think they'll stay the same? And nobody, 100% of the people say, I think they're going up. Nothing else makes sense whenever you look at it in this little modular unit of like your next door neighbor. If that was actually their numbers, it's like, oh, well, shit, like they need more money.
Yeah, and let's go back to incentive there. Those numbers you shared, that is the government. They're the ones that have you automatically contributing to your 401k.
That's their plan.
Let's pop back to incentives and let's go back to those 4 things that they want.
That's the IRS tax code. 401k, section 401.k.
It's a government code and it's a government rule policy that you will automatically be opted into that. So what are they doing with that money? It always go back to incentives and kind of tying a ribbon on our discussion on retirement, et cetera. It was one thing we talked about the distribution rules for the 401ks, IRAs, et cetera, these qualified plans. And I was listening to our episode, the saving versus investing versus speculating episode when it came out. At the very end, we were talking about the required minimum distributions. And I just wanted to elaborate on that. And I said like something along the lines of, who came up with this idea that at a certain age, you have to spend this down. And I started thinking about the incentives there. We understand why for 40 years, they give us this strong incentive to not touch our money, right? They automatically put it in for us. And then they say, you can't touch it without a steep penalty. So for 40 years, they're saying, you cannot touch this money. And then we have a 10, 12-year window from 60 to 72-ish where we have free access to our money. And then at 72 and a half or 73, you are now penalized several times larger than the penalty was for early withdrawal. You're now heavily, heavily penalized, 50% penalty if you don't withdraw these minimums. Now, why? Why did the incentive just flip? You have to store your money with us and let us use it for 4 decades. You get a 10-year window to use it. And now you have to spend it down. And why? The only incentive I can think of is they don't want you leaving it to your family. You are so strong. I mean, 50% penalty is unbelievable. Every dollar that you don't pull out that they think you should be pulling out, you're going to lose half of it. That is so preposterous. There's no like trying to see good intention. There's no benefit of the doubt here. The only possible incentive for that is they want you to spend this money down and spend it down out of your economy into the larger economy so that your posterity will have less and then that they'll have to go into the system again. I've talked before. I did a cross elective when I was doing my master's program on tax law. And so I had a really good professor who explained this stuff. And I've made this point before that and I think I talked about with Tax Sherpa when we did our interview with him, but a lot of my challenges with the tax system, the things I find wrong with it, I could ask questions and get an answer that even if I don't agree with was, okay, I see the other side here. I see what the intention is. I don't believe it. I don't believe the reasoning behind it, but I get why this makes sense to tax professionals. I get why this makes sense to government economists. The one thing I could never get an answer on was RMDs. And if you know, leave a comment, email us, whatever, because I would actually like to know what is the best case scenario if someone's going to steel man that argument, because I cannot do it myself. I cannot find any reason to justify RMDs other than drain out your money so you don't leave it behind.
Yeah, which begs the question then, why do you want to leave your money in a place where you have such little control and where somebody who probably doesn't have your best interest at heart does have control? And I think we're good there. So we don't know what the taxes will be, but most people would agree they'll probably be more on, at least in the current trajectory. Inflation, I touched it. I think we've talked about it a lot. The second way that the government can make up that deficit in spending is how? To print money. And when we print money, when we put more money into the economy, that's what inflation is. I mean, I don't want to we can have a whole conversation about what inflation is, because the general public, not probably the people listening to this, but the general public thinks it's like rising prices, but that's just a result of inflation. Inflation is just an increase in the money supply. And that's how they make up that deficit. If you're living here in 2024, or if you're listening to this after that in 2025 sometime or later, if you're alive, you recognize that inflation is real. It happens. And it can get out of control, out of the control of the people who pretend like they can control it. All the price of everything you do is going to go up, along with the taxes likely. So just realize that. That's all.
I was born in 1988. So let's just go back to 1988. I was obviously not sentient as far as understanding any of this, but let's say if you go back to 1988, and anyone who's older than me or who was an adult back then would probably agree with this. I'm going to say with full confidence, 20,000 will get you a nice car. 90,000 would get you a decent house in most parts of the country. Now, if you're looking, I know we're in the market for a new car. We need to get a third row. We want to, for planning for a larger family, et cetera. Like we're starting to our car search right now. If you're looking at the standard models of the newer kind of SUVs that we want to look at that actually meet our criteria, we're looking in the ballpark of 50 grand, but those are for the basic models, maybe 1 year used, but it's not hard to spend 90 grand on a car, get the newest souped up 4Runner. Spending 90 grand on a car is not impossible now. Escalades are about 130 grand right now. So all that to say, you cannot get a decent car for 20 grand anymore, and you can't get a decent house for 90 grand anymore. So let's fast forward 30 more years. When you're now retiring, we're making all these assumptions here. What if a car costs you $150,000 for your 4Runner, for whatever? Like, that's not out of the realm of possibility, especially because that curve is steepening. It's not just a linear growth of inflation here. It can't be inherent to the money printing system. The way that this debt is growing, it can't be linear. It is going to be exponential growth. And so let's just say that you making this plan, and this plan is to withdraw. I'm living on 70%. The market does X. I'm living on, right now I'm living off $150,000 a year, but I'll be living off of 120 when I retire. Well, what if a car costs you $150,000? You're not planning for that right now. It's just, you cannot make these assumptions in an economy, a fiat economy, where money is created at will by the act of lending it. Again, not to go down, further on that discussion, but you're making current assumptions as far as the cost of goods and the cost of your life that you cannot possibly make right now. You cannot possibly make that call of what it'll be in 30 years, because no one, I guarantee you, in 1988 would have thought cars would be pushing six figures and that the same house that they bought for 90,000 is now worth 500 grand. Like, no one was thinking that. And so you cannot possibly make these assumptions. And I think it's irresponsible to do so.
How long are we going to live? Like, that's the other thing is, like, for one, what if you don't live as long as predicted? Like, could you have done something better with that money? What if you live longer? That's the real danger. So it's another assumption that they make, is that they're gonna wrap this model out for a certain period of time. I like to think that I'm living long past what they're giving us for 65. I'm planning for my dollars and my money and my wealth to outlive me. That's the plan. So I don't even really care about the whole projections of, like, how much money do I get in my age, because I think it's about a way of thinking. Again, the wealth that I create is going to be generational, and it's going to far outlive anything I do, because I'm not even going to accept this, this model of the CFP of, let's plan so that all of your money lasts you this long. It's a ridiculous. It goes back to the very first thing we talked about for 30 minutes. It's ridiculous to begin with. Nobody can predict it. I think it's stupid. I don't know. I don't even care to talk about it that much.
Yeah, there's a good analogy, a little anecdote I've heard that kind of is analogous to this, the barrel of water on the island, if you've heard that. The idea that, you're stranded on a desert island, you have no water on the island, and a barrel comes floating full of fresh drinking water. It floats up, lands on the island, you're overjoyed. But how long do you need to make that barrel of water last? Can you just start drinking that water right away? What do you need to do for planning? And you can't know the answer because you don't know two things. In order to determine the rate at which you can drink that, you need to know two things. Will there be any more water provided? And how long will I be on this island? If you're going to get picked up in 2 days, it's a bit different story if you're going to get picked up in 2 years. If you're going to get a barrel a week, it's a different story than if you're going to get no more barrels. And you cannot possibly know those two things. And in this analogy, it would be, are you going to have more income coming in? What's the market going to do? Are you going to be getting these returns from your nest egg?
Well, if you follow that model, you're not going to have more income coming in. That's the problem. Like, you're guaranteeing that you're cutting out one of those variables. So now you're down to one variable. How long do I have to make this barrel of water last? Because in that analogy, I mean, the next barrel coming is more income. And if you're doing nothing to create it and nothing to provide value, like, if you use their model, you have fixed the income.
You're pitting everything on the nest egg performs, provides, earns, or not quite, appreciates, and then you have a good strategy to withdraw. Like, there is a world where this income keeps coming in because you draw down your assets, but you don't know. It's all this uncertainty baked into it, but you're certainly not getting any more income in once you retire.
Yeah. And part of that uncertainty is, how's the market going to perform? If you're going to plan on that nest egg, how's the market going to perform between however old you are now and this 65-year-old retirement age? is it going to ensure, since the basis of this, which is the next point that we'll get to in another episode, the basis of the foundation of all of this is market-based planning. Well, how's it going to perform? What if it underperforms? Maybe it'll overperform. That's awesome. But what if it doesn't? What if it doesn't perform as projected? Then you cross that finish line to retirement, and what you're talking about, it has to perform in order for you to continue to have more money and continue the spending you plan to have. We're drawing this prediction of market performance as a guarantee. And anybody that was that retired in 2007 will probably tell you they shit their pants a little bit in 2008 when they didn't have any income and their nest egg went down by 40% or more.
2022, we lost about a quarter. I think it was 22%. That was 2 years ago on the whole. Now, of course, it skyrocketed. And again, we're never ever saying don't invest. We're not saying if you have your 401k, if you have, if you're saving for retirement, like we're not saying that you need to panic and that just needs to change. You just need to recognize what has to go right for that plan to work. Everything. Taxes, how long you live, inflation, annual spending, the market performance, all of these assumptions have to go right in order for this to work. How many things need to go wrong for your plan to fall apart? Just one. That, I think, is a good ending place for this part. And we can roll on to steps 2 and 3, which is use the stock market as the foundation of your wealth and build a retirement nest egg, which will be another episode. But anything else on the predictive future portion that we didn't hit that we need to?
We can't predict the future. So I say, men, take dominion, do God's command, be fruitful, multiply, be productive. That's the dominion part. Be productive the rest of your life. There's no biblical command to retire. I'm not saying it's unbiblical, but it certainly isn't baked into the Bible. There's nowhere that tells you to retire. And find yourselves a Proverbs 31 woman to spend that time dominating with.
And leave an inheritance to your children's children. That's a good wrap up there. We'll see you guys next time. Next week, we'll continue on with the rest of the accumulation theory model.
We'll be wearing the same thing.
Peace.
See you.